Welcome to Emotion Well, EFR's podcast about all things related to emotional wellness. I'm Johanna Dunleavy, the Wellness Manager for Employee and Family Resources, also known as EFR, and I'm the host of our podcast. As an FYI, EFR is located in Des Moines, Iowa, and we are Iowa's first employee assistance program and provide a variety of services you can learn more about at www.efr.org. I'm excited to be here today with my colleague, Mary McCarthy. Mary is EFR's business manager, and she is also the owner of Resilience and Grace. Mary, welcome to Emotion Well.
Thanks so much, Johanna, for having me.
Very excited to hear about your yoga journey. So we're not talking shop. We're talking about your experience practicing yoga, teaching yoga, encouraging others to adopt this practice, and the benefits of it. So go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you came into the world of yoga.
Sure, thank you. So I have been practicing yoga for 24 years, and the practice of yoga has changed drastically, not only here in the Midwest, but of course all across the world and especially nationwide. In the early 2000s, I was introduced to the practice of yoga just coming off of the heels of graduating from the University of Iowa with a degree in exercise science. As a certified athletic trainer, I was really steeped in the world of performance and understanding sports psychology and what did it look like to prevent injuries and take care of the body. And so when I did an internship at Farm Bureau here in Des Moines, it was in the wellness center. And one of the employees who was very, very interested in yoga brought a book. And she came down to the fitness center, found me, and said, "Does anyone here know about yoga and know how to teach it? I'm really interested."
Yeah.
And so I opened the book, and it was like a very basic Iyengar yoga book. And Iyengar is a type of hatha yoga that is alignment based. I opened it and I looked at it and I was like, well, this is like not too bad. I know how to align the body and I understand the anatomy and the language that it was. And so I was like, well, let's give it a try. I'll learn. I found quickly that there were not very many teachers in Des Moines, maybe 2 or 3. And when I found a teacher to apprentice with, because that is how it was back then, there were no certifications, there wasn't the Yoga Alliance. If you wanted to be a yoga teacher and practice yoga, you had to go find a really experienced practitioner. And so there was this woman, Marcy Graham, and she taught out of her home and she taught at Plymouth Church. And at that time, Plymouth Church, and still is, this wonderful, welcoming community. So I went, and I remember thinking, like, how does anyone teach yoga for, or practice yoga and stretch for over an hour? The classes were 90
so
minutes
slow.
long. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Especially since I was 22, and all I had come from was, okay, if I had an hour, I was going to lift weights, burn calories, do cardio, who had time to just stretch for an hour? But I was like, well, I'm curious. I'll go do this. I was easily 20 plus years younger than everyone else in the class. And I will tell you that my first experience was so created such an impression that as I did this, I had never experienced something where it was all for me. It was everyone put down their yoga mat. And yes, we were practicing in a group, but the teacher made it so welcoming that she kept encouraging us to do this for ourselves.
Nice.
To do a practice that helped us feel good, that it wasn't about performing for anyone else. It wasn't comparing ourselves to what the next person could do. We were invited to close our eyes and to feel and to welcome ourselves fully in our own bodies. And that was such a different way for me to show up and move. By the time that I got to Shavasana at the end, I found myself having tears roll down my eyes because it was so moving for me. And I knew that I was onto something I wanted to keep learning more about.
That's great. And so for our listeners who are unfamiliar with yoga, Shavasana is the final stage of a yoga practice where it's kind of complete relaxation. So oftentimes you're on your back, on the floor, arms and legs relaxed. And personally, my favorite part of the yoga journey is Shavasana. So I think it's interesting how you kind of shared that the instructor encouraged you, to feel different things because prior to practicing yoga, I'm guessing that most of your workouts, you were focused on feeling something physically, feeling a good burn, feeling your heart rate elevated, feeling like, you got a good workout, but not necessarily connecting that workout, whether it was a cardio workout or a strength training workout, to something that was elevating your mood and your, brain health, as well as your physical, muscles, musculoskeletal system. So I think that as people have evolved in their practices of whatever routine that they want to stick to, whether it's, a very holistic, it's a cardio strength yoga, or maybe it's all yoga, or maybe it's all cardio. I think people are now making the connection between any kind of, physical movement, whether it's intense or really relaxed, and the way they feel emotionally, right? And it's more than just that physical sensation. So I'm glad that you made that connection early on, and that it sounds transformational. I guess that's the word that I would use as I was listening to you. It sounds like that first experience you had was pretty transformational. And so that was early 2000s, and you've been practicing since then. And then when did you become a registered yoga teacher?
Sure. So my career led me to becoming and moving into the space of wellness as a wellness specialist. And I worked with in the space of these really wonderful large wellness teams at Principal Financial Group, at Wellmark, Blue Cross Blue Shield, at Wesley Life. And throughout each of these different roles, I had the opportunity to really focus on stress management. That was sort of the buzzword. And in that space, we were trying to bring forward into the working world more of those complementary and alternative practices like Qigong and Tai Chi and yoga, Pilates, very mind based practices.
Mm.
Um, and I had, for the first 14 years of me teaching, I actually was not certified
Okay.
because it wasn't necessary. I had a lot of experience with anatomy and physiology, that part was already done, where most yoga teachers coming into the space do not have that
Right.
background. And then because I had traveled all over and was taking these real intensive workshops, I really began to understand the philosophy of yoga and studied the Bhagavad Gita, the yamas, the niyamas, the sutras, these ancient philosophy teachings that I could weave into my practice. And for a long time, I didn't feel like it was necessary because yoga was not something you had to climb a ladder to do. It was very holistic and a personal practice. But in 2014, after I had been teaching yoga in Des Moines, the Parks and Rec program actually in Des Moines, we began this free class in the summers for people to make yoga more accessible called Yoga in the Park.
Yes, I loved it.
And luckily it's still going on in the spring and summer months and fall months. But in 2014, they decided that they wanted to make sure that all of their teachers were certified. And even though I had taught the very first year and helped grow this program, I was no longer able to be a teacher.
Oh, wow.
And so I then, luckily, my friend and colleague, Brett Berlin Scott, who's the owner of Shakti, we started teaching yoga at the same time in Des Moines. And I was teaching yoga on the side because I had this career in wellness, and she opened a yoga studio. And so we led these really parallel lives around teaching yoga. And she chose in that year of 2014 to offer a teacher training. And I thought, well, I guess I'll do it.
Yeah.
And I had so much fun. I trusted Brett. I knew that she was going to bring a very quality practice. And so that is when I decided, okay, I'll go do the official paperwork and I'll go get my 200 hour. It was that time that I left corporate wellness. And because I was actually pregnant with my third child during this 200 hour teacher training.
Okay.
And that was a great time for me because I spent the first half of the teacher training still working and the second half home. And what was unique for Brett and all of my colleagues who were going through the training at the time, I brought the element of how do you practice yoga pregnant?
Yeah.
What does this look like and how do we adopt the practice? So I could be an actual, example and we could modify the practice so that we could show people who are going to be teachers what this was like to welcome all bodies,
Yeah.
all abilities.
That's great. How did you, or at what point in your yoga journey did you really make a connection between practicing yoga, no matter whether it was once a day or a few times a week, was having a positive impact on your overall health and well-being?
I would say that from the first class, I knew right away it made a shift inside of me. Besides the tears that flowed, I had never connected to my body in a way that was so loving and kind. And I had injured myself, which has led me to athletic training. I tore my ACL in high school. And so I was forced out of the competitive sport world because of my injury.
Okay.
And the practice of yoga, as I witnessed other people of all ages, I could see that this was like going to be a practice that was going to be lifelong.
Mm-hmm.
And as I read books and I was following individuals and I was like learning about modifications, I was like, oh, this is something that's just not done for young people or for old people or for able-bodied individuals. This truly is a practice for everyone. And I was so interested because of my own personal experience of being in a wheelchair and losing my ability to compete in sports that I wanted to bring this to others in such a way that not only made their bodies feel good, but started to help their mind. Um, for me, I struggle with anxiety, and I come from a household that there was a lot of yelling and dysfunction. And I'm the oldest and have some perfectionism in me. And so finding this practice helped me remember that I am whole just as I am.
Yeah.
I don't have to perform for anyone else. I don't have to be someone that I'm not. And as I learned more about meditation and more about connecting to energy and more about tuning in and having self awareness, I think as I started practicing, that's how I started teaching.
Sure. No, I love that. I think we have a lot of parallels because I also interned at Farm Bureau. I was just a few years after you. And I also was given the heads up, hey, you're going to be teaching yoga here. So probably thanks to you, Mary, I was on that track as well. But I've never become a registered yoga instructor. But like you, I also, have a background in health promotion, and my undergraduate did involve some anatomy and exercise science courses. So I was also able to, teach yoga, at a level that was safe and balanced. And I would never call myself a yoga instructor because I've never been through, the proper training. I've not earned that right to call myself a yoga instructor, but I have instructed and I've practiced for a long time. But one thing I like about yoga, and I do most of my yoga practice at home. And so I want to talk a little bit about that because I do think there's an accessibility issue when it comes to yoga studios. Some people just can't afford to practice yoga in a studio. And so that's why I want to talk about community-based yoga in parks as well as home-based yoga. But I've been someone who's always liked to be active, and in my 20s and early 30s, I focused more on cardiovascular health and, strength training. And those are still very important and they're still part of my routine. But when I got into my mid to late 30s, I started noticing that I really needed something that could help with anxiety and kind of calm me down. And I started practicing yoga with Adriene off of YouTube, and it's been pretty life changing. I mean, I feel like every, so my routine is every day I get up and I try to connect with myself before I connect with the rest of the world, right? So before I connect with my family, and that's a wild card because when you have a kid, you never know what time they're going to get up. But she's at an age now where it's a little more predictable. But I try to connect with myself through, a short yoga practice, maybe a guided relaxation or meditation, or some journaling or something that's more introspective before I pick up my phone and start getting hijacked by all these other things that are going on. And so I'm wondering if you could help our listeners understand how easy it can be to adopt a yoga practice through some of the resources that are available, whether they're in a community or online, and what someone might want to look for in terms of what would be a good fit for them.
Yeah. I love listening to your own journey, Johanna, as well. It is similar to mine. And I think a lot of people who find the practice of yoga, it is life changing. It can be really life changing if you find the practice that resonates with you. It can also turn people away if they go into a studio and the instructor is maybe they've come into a class that is very fitness based at a level that's not appropriate for their body
Well,
or
I do have an example a long time ago when Groupon was a big thing. I know Groupon is still a thing, but when it first came out, like in 2012, I found a Groupon it was called Firehouse Yoga over near Drake University. And it doesn't exist any longer, but I got a Groupon for, something like 12 classes for the price of 6. And I remember going to my first class and I didn't know what class to pick. So I picked one that worked with my schedule. And I entered a class that was pretty advanced. And I was so intimidated. And I wanted to leave within 5 minutes, not because I didn't feel welcome, but because I didn't know, well, one, I didn't know what I was getting into when I was going to a more advanced yoga class. I thought, well, I'm a Pilates instructor. I'm a fit person. I can do this. No, no. It was definitely more advanced. And I stuck it out, and then I found a different class there that worked better for me. But I think even someone who's really comfortable walking into a fitness center, like I worked in a fitness center, I was really comfortable walking into a fitness center. I walked into that studio and I was very intimidated. And so I just, I think it's important that people have a good first experience. And if they don't, to have another first experience with something else. So I didn't mean to
absolutely.
interrupt you, but I just wanted to make note of that because I think it can be really intimidating. And for me, it was they were all doing like shoulder stands and headstands. And I was like, I don't even know how to do that. I'm not sure what I'm doing here. So,
Yeah.
but that's
Yeah,
not yoga. Yoga can be anything. I mean, it can look very different, depending on the person and the practice.
absolutely. And I think that's such a misconception that yoga equals asana or
Right.
poses. And yoga doesn't. It's a very holistic practice that incorporates so many pieces. In the Patanjali Sutras of the 8 limbs of yoga, there's 8 aspects of yoga, and asana or postures are just one of them.
Sure.
And so you're absolutely right. I like to invite people to come and practice with me. And as I instruct, I'll say to them, especially a brand new person, I may not be the best fit for you. And that's okay because you want to feel like you can trust the instructor. You want to feel that you are welcomed and that there is a comfort level, not just physically, but emotionally. And so you're right. It's important to keep trying and explore. And so to go back to your question, like how does someone begin and how do they find that right fit for them? Because it doesn't have to be in a yoga studio. But if you are wanting to go to a yoga studio, I always recommend talking to the instructor first
Sure.
and actually seeing if you can schedule an appointment and meet with them or talk to them on the phone and understand their philosophy, understand their background, do a little bit of research on their website, see if you like the vibe. And then if you are going into a studio for the first time, go and place your mat in a place in the room that you're comfortable in. And it's okay if it's in the back row.
Yeah.
And it's okay if it's in the front row because you can't hear as well, or you want to see, or you don't want to be distracted by other people. It's like go where it's best for you. And I encourage people to come early, see if you can stay late. And, like to your point, try to find a class that is not just fits your time and your schedule, but
Uh-huh.
really fits where you're entering.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's really good.
And I
Um,
think if you go to a studio or a class, because you can go to the YMCA and take a yoga class, and that's different than a yoga studio. I mean, there's so many different ways to practice yoga, but I feel like I was comparing myself to others, and that was making me more self-conscious. And so I think that, release that desire to compare yourself, because everyone's at a different point in the journey, and that's not what yoga is about. It's not about how far someone can stretch or how long they can hold a pose. It's really about where you are in this moment today. And that might be different from where you were yesterday and where you'll be tomorrow. And just, using yourself as, the focus versus what the people around you are doing. I think that'd be some advice I'd give my younger self before walking into that studio many, many years ago.
I very much appreciate that because as well as a teacher, or if you're finding classes online, like with Adrian, um, a teacher that can offer modifications and to
Yes.
remind people to do what feels good. I think that invitation, that language of inclusivity is so important. And I think that is how the yoga journey and the practice is shifting. So some things have stayed the same. If you are going to more of a power yoga class,
Sure.
very fitness based, very focused on achievement and doing specific poses in a specific way. Or you're also can work with teachers and practitioners that invite you to be where you are today.
Sure.
So even though some days I like to kick up and handstand and it's really fun to go upside down, some days my energy is very low and I give myself permission to maybe do more of a practice that's restorative or yin or a meditation, or I even use more props. Maybe I'm going to use blocks or bolsters or a strap. And that is the beauty of so many different styles of yoga, that it's can be really tailored to what your needs are. And I think that's the gift of the practice, is that you begin seated or in a posture that invites you to check in.
Mm-hmm.
You are actually invited to see how's your body feeling right now? How's your energy level right now? Where are you in your mind? Are you distracted? Are you present? So when you do that check in, that guides the way that you want to practice. And it helps you to decide, am I wanting to go to a class that's in a group? Do I want to do something more for myself alone at
Right.
home? Do I want a more energizing practice? Do I need a more calming practice? And that's where yoga becomes such a mindful experience that can help with anxiety, but can also help with depression, can help us from this very distracted, busy mind to one that's very present and focused.
Yeah.
And because it is a journey, it is lifelong. I might be an experienced practitioner, but I'm no expert at calming my mind.
Right.
I, I still struggle with having a busy mind. I still struggle with going to sleep at night when I am under a lot of
Sure.
stress. But what is different for me now is that I have a lot of tools that I can explore and try out to see if it will help me. And the more that I practice in states where I'm not stressed, and I practice in states where I'm not in that fight or flight, like you, I get up in the morning and I do these things when I'm ready for the day. I show up with this intention, like, how do I want to be today?
Uh-huh.
And that when I practice in the morning gives me this point of reference so that maybe midday or at the end of my day, I also need to practice in some way, but it's just laying down or it's sitting in my chair at work, closing my eyes and breathing for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And all of that is yoga.
Right. Yeah. And it's nice because it gives you a bigger toolbox to turn to when you are in those moments where you maybe need something immediately to help you with anxiety or stress, or to practice mindfulness. I think I definitely notice a lot of the emotional benefits of a yoga practice. And then for people who are more motivated by the physical benefits of, movement, I've always struggled with flexibility, and I think it's just a great way to kind of loosen the body up, especially first thing in the morning. But whenever you're able to practice, I think it's a great way to just get the body moving, increase body awareness, because with yoga, when you're doing things, on, the first side of the body and then the second side of the body, you're going to notice differences, right? You might have one hip that's tighter because that's the leg that you always cross when you're sitting in a chair, or you might notice that, gosh, every time I go into child's pose, my low back feels less tight and tense. And maybe that's something I would benefit from doing, for a few minutes every morning before I get up and go. And then I also feel like your core strength improves quite a bit with a lot of the different yoga practices, because so much of it is, focused on the breath and aligning the breath with the movement. And so that's one thing we haven't really talked about, but would you like to talk about the breath and how important that is in a yoga practice, no matter what that practice looks like?
I would. I'd like to talk about the breath, but also go back to what you were saying with the benefits of yoga helping flexibility. I think yoga, we might have seen, it glamorized more with older adults, or, I think I found yoga with so many people practicing in their 40s and 50s and 60s because yoga helps with flexibility
Yeah.
and mobility
Hmm.
and strength and balance. And these are so important physical concepts and things to work on as our body ages. And so to prevent injury and to prevent chronic diseases from settling in and to prevent falls and all these things that we think about as we age, the practice of yoga can be so healing if we have tight hips or a tight back or a shoulder injury or, things of this
Sure.
nature that come up. I also love that as I worked at Wesley Life for 10 years, I taught yoga to older adults, to people of all ages. And we could still practice yoga in our 90s that was more breath based. So, to
Sure.
your point, how can the breath be so helpful in a practice? Beginner students are so fun. They'll say, Mary, you're cueing inhale to do this and exhale to do this. And every single time I want to do the opposite of what you're saying. And it's fun because we all have this knowing laugh, exactly what you just did. And it's because we take for granted our breath. The breath
Yeah.
is such this incredible part of our body that we can it can be automatic. We can
Right.
do it, not think about it.
Yeah. It's conscious and
And
subconscious.
absolutely. And we can then consciously shift it and change it.
Yeah.
The breath, I like to describe it as the bridge between the mind and the body. And as we use the breath, if our mind is racing, we can slow down the breath. That will help to also slow down the tension we feel in our body, the racing heart. And at the same time, there are breath practices that when we are very depressed, low energy, there are breath practices that help us increase our energy and help wake us up.
Uh-huh.
So we can use the breath to bring us into balance, like Nadi Shodhana, this alternate nostril breathing, to manipulate our energy and to manipulate our state of mind and manipulate our body in a positive way. And it's so fascinating. And you can even do breath practices where no one knows,
Yes.
right? That's such a gift. I tell people, it's like, okay, you're stressing out, you're driving in a car, maybe
Yes.
passenger, and you do not like what's happening as your driver. And instead of being a backseat driver, you start just doing your own thing and
Yeah.
breathing.
I do it also when I'm in line at a store and I'm feeling maybe anxious because I'm running behind schedule and, I don't have control over how long the line is going to last or how fast it moves. And so I often turn to it in that space too. It's like when I'm waiting, I feel like that's a good opportunity. I think so many people turn to their devices when they're waiting. You're waiting in a doctor's office, you're waiting in line, you're waiting, in a drive-through, wherever you're waiting. What if instead of getting your device out to check messages, you focused on your breath? And I think it's those found moments that make a big difference because I think most people are going to struggle to say, okay, for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to focus on my breath
Right.
because that's not realistic. I mean, for some people it might be, but I'm just going to say for a lot of people, most people, it's probably not something that they're going to just sit down and do unless they've already had that practice developed for a long time. But what if it's those found moments in the car, waiting in line, right before you fall asleep at night? My daughter, who's 7, has started to notice, the deep breaths. And she'll make funny comments like, Mom, is everything okay? Yeah, I'm just breathing. And I'm trying to work with her when she gets, dysregulated with her emotions as kids do, like trying to focus on the breath. I think that's one way that you can help regulate yourself. So uh anything else you want to share with our audience about yoga, about mindfulness? Yoga is a form of mindfulness. I think that's the beauty of mindfulness is that it can take on so many different forms. And so through our roles at EFR, we facilitate a lot of different trainings, and you and I have a lot of overlap with our areas of interest and expertise. And I think the message I always like to send in my mindfulness training is mindfulness doesn't mean you meditate, you sit in, silence with your legs crossed. That's a form of mindfulness, but meditation is not the end all be all of mindfulness. It can be so many things. And yoga, again, is one of them. And I think that for people who are intimidated by yoga, I think trying an in-home practice would be a great, great place. And I'm going to link Yoga with Adriene in the show notes just because I do think it's a reputable, solid, inclusive option for people who are, just starting or well into their journey. But anything that you want to share or have us do as a leave behind?
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. One of the things that I really want to encourage people to try as well is to expand their exposure to the different styles of yoga because they can really help people in different times in different ways to explore restorative yoga or yin, which is to help stretch the fascia and to work with the meridians and the energy lines of the body, to even try a chair yoga class because you can get into different muscles with the support of props, maybe a gentle yoga practice, even yoga nidra. And yoga nidra, we haven't talked about it all, but it is one of the practices of pratyahara, one of the 8 limbs of yoga. And it is an opportunity truly to decompress and
Mm-hmm.
to be in that space between being awake and asleep. And there's just so many benefits as we think about our brains and how our stress levels are high, and they're in cortisol, they're soaking in cortisol. These practices, like you were sharing, they really help downshift us. And in a frenetic world where we're always plugged in,
Uh-huh.
helping us do these little small moments of breath work or just stretching your neck or, standing in line and doing a quick body scan.
Uh-huh.
These are all wonderful ways to practice yoga. Finding out what's in your community, looking online. You had mentioned accessibility, and there are a couple really wonderful, influential teachers now that are in the space of accessible yoga to help people who maybe have some sort of chronic condition
Uh-huh.
and can modify. And a true mixed level class is when a teacher is able to teach people on the mat and in a chair.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are in a mixed level practice, that's the beauty of knowing that this is for everyone. And you can find a variety of classes online and in the community, or for people to know that it's for all bodies, larger bodies, older bodies, injured bodies. Like, I just really encourage people wherever you're at to welcome this practice. Have you invited me? My business is called Resilience and Grace.
Yeah, and we'll leave a link to that in the show notes.
That would be great. Thank you. Because, I taught for 20 years at Plymouth Church, and I taught in person because there is something about practicing with other people.
Yeah, the community aspect of it.
Absolutely. And feeling the energy, the collective energy, and to show up. And that sweet Shavasana at the end is really special. Um, but if, but in the, after the pandemic, I started and I opened a yoga studio online. And what is great for me, is that I'm able to now record and have this expansive on demand online library with over 450 classes now,
I love it.
that of all kinds. And people can try the 20-minute, 10-minute class, or 30-minute, or 60-minute, or even those 90-minute practices. So, it really does help people meet them where they are. Um, and my podcast, Resilience and Grace, has a variety of breath practices.
Yes.
Because accessibility, when you look at it, it is, unfortunately, it's really seemed as a practice for white, affluent, educated, able-bodied individuals. And I have always, it's been really important to me to make it accessible in a variety of ways. So I have a YouTube channel to have classes that are free. And I have a podcast to make meditations free. I love to teach in the community. So I do teach with the Parks and Rec programs to make classes more accessible. And then I do teach online, and there is a cost to that to sustain my own learning and my ability to host a platform and to bring in income to keep that going. Because yoga teachers who are in this, who get certified, who have gone through the more formalized teachings, it costs money.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of time. And yoga is not free for us who are teachers.
Right.
And there is a reciprocity of acknowledging that teaching and to give back to the teacher. And so the word namaste in the Sanskrit language is shared in the tradition because it is an honoring of the light within me, the light within you. It truly is this reverent way to greet each other. Even though I may be the teacher and you may be the student, we share this language, we share this to know that all are welcome, all are equal, and all are valued. And I think the practice of yoga is so holistic and welcoming because it's truly seeped in those beliefs. It's not just for Hinduism or people who practice Buddhism or people who practice Christianity or people who are educated or people that have money and wear Lululemon pants.
Right. Right.
It is for everyone. And I appreciate the opportunity to share my own journey. Of
Yes. Thank you
course,
so much.
being a teacher of 24 years, there's many things I'm sure I'll think about later. I wish I would have said that. I wish I would have said that. But
No, this was a great conversation, and I'm just glad that you've touched so many lives with, your yoga journey, and just think about the years to come and how many more people will be positively affected by that. And I feel like it's only appropriate to sign off with a namaste.
absolutely.
Namaste.
Namaste, Johanna.
Emotion Well is hosted by Johanna Dunleavy and produced by Troy Ford.